The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was bigger than most cities on Earth. Thousands of seats rose up in circles around a central platform where the most powerful beings in the galaxy made decisions that affected trillions of lives. Today, the hall buzzed with nervous energy. Representatives from 47 different species had gathered for an emergency session, and everyone knew what it was about. Humanity. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat in the small section reserved for Earth's delegation. She was a small woman compared to most of the aliens around her, but her dark eyes missed nothing. Her hands rested calmly on the table in front of her, but inside her skull, tiny machines were already working. Her neural implant was recording everything and sending coded messages back to Earth, faster than light itself. At the center of the hall stood Ambassador Zephyr of the Altarian Empire. He was tall and thin with blue skin that seemed to glow under the chamber's lights. His species had been part of the council for over 2,000 years, and he spoke with the authority of someone who had never been challenged. "Honored delegates," Zephyr began, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. "We are here today to address the growing threat that humanity poses to galactic peace and stability." Sarah kept her face blank, but her implant was already analyzing the words and sending them home. She had expected this day would come. Humanity had been expanding too fast, growing too strong, and asking too many uncomfortable questions about how the galaxy really worked. "In the past 50 standard years," Zephyr continued, "humanity has established colonies in over 200 star systems. They have built fleets that rival those of species who have been spacefaring for millennia. Most concerning of all, they have shown a disturbing willingness to use force when diplomacy fails." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Sarah noticed that some species looked worried while others seemed angry. A few appeared almost excited, as if they had been waiting for this moment. "3 months ago," Zephyr said, his voice growing harder, "human forces occupied the Kepler 442 system, despite our clear warnings that it was claimed by the vegan collective. 2 weeks later, they took control of the Vol 359 trade routes, disrupting commerce that has flowed peacefully for centuries. Last week, human ships were detected in the Ross 128 system, which borders Council Core territory." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The Council made it sound like humanity had invaded peaceful neighbors, but they knew the truth. The vegan collective had been using slave labor to mine those asteroids. The Vol 359 routes had been controlled by pirates who paid bribes to Council officials. And Ross 128 was empty space that the Council claimed but never used. "The time for warnings has passed," Zephyr announced. "Humanity's expansion must be stopped before it destabilizes the entire galaxy. Therefore, by unanimous vote of the Inner Council, we demand the following." The hall fell silent. Sarah's implant hummed softly as it prepared to transmit whatever came next to every human outpost in the galaxy. "First," Zephyr said, "all human. Military forces will stand down immediately and report to Council facilities for decommissioning. Second, all human colonies beyond the Sol system will be placed under Council protection and administration. Third, Earth itself will accept a Council oversight committee to ensure compliance with galactic law." The silence stretched on. Sarah could feel thousands of alien eyes watching her, waiting for her response. Some looked satisfied, as if humanity was finally getting what it deserved. Others seemed uncomfortable, perhaps remembering their own species' early days in the galaxy. "You have 72 standard hours to comply," Zephyr continued. "If you refuse, the Council will have no choice but to implement these measures by force. We have assembled a fleet of 800 ships from 12 different species. They are already moving toward your space." Sarah stood slowly. At barely 5.5 feet tall, she looked tiny in the enormous chamber, but when she spoke, her voice carried clearly to every corner. "I have heard the Council's demands," she said. "Simply, I will transmit them to my government immediately." That was all she said. No protests, no arguments, no desperate pleas for more time. She simply sat back down and began typing on her personal communicator. Ambassador Zephyr looked surprised. He had clearly expected more of a fight, more drama. Around the hall, other delegates whispered among themselves. Some seemed disappointed that humanity was giving up so easily. Others looked relieved that there would be no war. What none of them knew was that Sarah's simple message to Earth contained more than just the Council's demands. Hidden in the innocent-looking diplomatic language were activation codes that had been prepared years ago. By the time her message reached Earth, it would trigger responses across human space that the galaxy had never seen before on Earth. President Martinez received the message in the middle of the night. He read it once, then again, then reached for a red phone that connected him directly to military command. "This is Dragon's Den," he said quietly. "Omega protocols are now in effect." Across human space, the message spread like wildfire. Colony governors opened sealed orders they had carried for years. Ship captains changed course toward coordinates they had memorized but never visited. Factories that had been producing civilian goods suddenly switched to military production. Back in the council chamber, Zephyr was finishing his speech. "We do not take this action lightly," he said. "The council has always preferred peaceful solutions. But humanity's reckless expansion threatens the order that has kept the galaxy stable for 3,000 years. We cannot allow one species to endanger the peace that billions depend on." Sarah listened with half her attention while her implant processed incoming messages from Earth. What she read made her heart race, but her face remained calm. The council thought they were dealing with a primitive species that had gotten lucky with faster-than-light travel. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "The council will provide humanitarian aid to human civilians during the transition," Zephyr continued. "We understand that this will be difficult for your people, but it is necessary. In time, humanity will thank us for preventing a galactic war." The session ended with formal votes and diplomatic ceremonies that meant nothing. Sarah played her part, speaking the right words and making the right gestures. But all the while, her implant was receiving updates from across human space. The Titan shipyards had gone dark, their massive construction bays sealed and hidden. The Mars defense grid had activated systems that officially did not exist. The asteroid belt mining platforms had stopped all communications, as if they had simply vanished. Colony ships that had been traveling to new worlds had changed course toward unknown destinations. Most importantly, the deep space fleet had begun moving. Ships that the Council had never detected were slipping through hyperspace toward positions that would change everything. As Sarah left the Council chamber, she passed Ambassador Zephyr in the corridor. He nodded politely, perhaps even respectfully. He seemed to think that humanity had accepted defeat gracefully. "I hope your people will see the wisdom in this decision," he said. Sarah looked up at him with dark eyes that held secrets the galaxy was not ready to learn. "Ambassador," she replied softly, "I think you will find that humanity is full of surprises." Within hours, those words would prove more prophetic than anyone could imagine. The Council had issued their ultimatum, confident in their superior numbers and ancient authority. They had given humanity 72 hours to surrender. Humanity's reply was already on its way. The message reached Earth 12 hours after Ambassador Chun sent it from the Council chambers. President Martinez had not slept since receiving the activation codes. He stood in the war room deep beneath the White House, surrounded by screens that showed the position of every human ship, station, and colony in the galaxy. "Status report," he said to Admiral Torres, who stood at the main tactical display. "Omega protocols are fully active, sir," Torres replied. His weathered face showed no emotion, but his eyes held the intensity of a man who had prepared for this moment his entire career. "All military assets are moving to predetermined positions. The Council thinks we're retreating, but we're actually advancing." On the screens around them, thousands of dots representing human ships were moving in what looked like chaos. Council observers would see ships fleeing toward the outer rim, colonies going silent, and defense platforms shutting down. What they could not see was the pattern behind the movement. Dr. Elizabeth Kane, Earth's chief military strategist, stepped forward. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes who had spent 20 years planning for this exact scenario. The beauty of Omega, she explained to the president, is that it looks like exactly what the council expects to see. Humans running. Scared, but we're not running, Martinez said. It was not a question. No, sir, Torres confirmed. We're hunting. The plan had begun forming the day humans first encountered the Galactic Council 30 years ago. While diplomats smiled and signed trade agreements, military planners studied their new neighbors with the cold efficiency that had made humans the apex predators of Earth. Every species in the galaxy had evolved on worlds very different from Earth. Most came from planets with lighter gravity, thinner atmospheres, or gentler environments. They had developed technology to overcome their physical limitations, but they had never developed the killer instinct that came from millions of years of evolution on a death world. Phase 1 is complete, Dr. Kane reported. All non-essential personnel have been evacuated from forward positions. The Council will interpret this as compliance with their demands. What the Council did not know was that non-essential personnel meant civilians, families, and anyone who could not fight. The people who remained behind were soldiers, engineers, and specialists who had volunteered for missions they might not survive. On the lunar base, Commander Jackson watched as the last transport ship disappeared into hyperspace. Around him, 300 men and women worked quietly to prepare defenses that officially did not exist. The moon's surface looked empty and peaceful, but beneath the gray dust lay weapon systems that could turn an entire fleet into scrap metal. Think they'll figure it out? Asked Lieutenant Singh, checking the power levels on a mass driver that could punch holes through battleships. Eventually, Jackson replied, but by then it will be too late. Similar scenes played out across human space. On Mars, underground factories that had been disguising themselves as mining operations revealed their true purpose. Assembly lines that had been producing farm equipment suddenly started building combat drones. The asteroid belt mining platforms, which the Council thought had gone offline, were actually working overtime to produce something much more dangerous than refined metals. Admiral Torres pulled up a star chart that showed the Council's fleet movements. 800 ships from 12 different species were moving toward Earth in a formation that looked unstoppable. They're being very careful, he observed. Staying in known hyperspace lanes, following standard military protocols. That's their first mistake, Dr. Kane said with a thin smile. They think space combat follows rules. Humans had learned differently. While other species built bigger ships with more powerful weapons, humans had focused on mobility, stealth, and the element of surprise. They had studied every recorded battle in galactic history and found the same pattern over and over again. Fleets met in open space, exchanged fire until one side retreated or was destroyed, and the winner claimed victory. But humans had grown up on a planet where the most successful hunters were the ones who struck from ambush, where the deadliest predators were the ones their prey never saw coming. Captain Elena Vasquez commanded the stealth cruiser Shadow Runner, currently hidden in the asteroid field between Mars and Jupiter. Her ship was completely invisible to Council. Sensors, using technology that bent light and absorbed energy signatures. Around her, 50 other ships waited in similar hiding spots throughout the solar system. Any word from the outer colonies? She asked her communications officer. Kepler Station reports successful withdrawal, came the reply. All defensive platforms are now mobile and running silent. The Council thinks we abandoned the system. Elena smiled. The Council measured strength by counting ships and weapons, but they had never learned to count ghosts. Kepler Station had not been abandoned. It had been transformed into something the galaxy had never seen before, a mobile fortress that could appear anywhere without warning. Back on Earth, President Martinez studied intelligence reports from across the galaxy. What's the mood in Council space? He asked. Mixed, replied Director Hayes from Intelligence. Some species are celebrating, thinking the human threat is over. Others are nervous about what comes next. A few are asking uncomfortable questions about whether this was really necessary. Good, Martinez said. Doubt is a weapon too. The Council had made their own mistakes. By demanding immediate surrender, they had revealed their fear of humanity's rapid expansion. By threatening force, they had shown that their peaceful rhetoric was just words. Most importantly, by giving humanity 72 hours, they had provided the perfect cover for the largest military deception in galactic history. Dr. Kane brought up another display showing hyperspace traffic throughout the galaxy. The Council is moving additional fleets to secure the routes they think we'll use to escape, she reported. They're spreading themselves thin, trying to cover every possible exit point. They still don't understand, Torres observed. They think we want to run away. The truth was more complex. Humans did not want to rule the galaxy or conquer other species. But they also refused to be caged like animals or treated like children who needed constant supervision. The Council's ultimatum had forced a choice, and humanity had chosen freedom over safety on the outer rim of human space. The mining ship Horizon's Edge received new orders from Earth. Captain Murphy read them twice before believing what they said. His ship, which had been collecting ice from comets for the past 5 years, was now part of the most important mission in human history. "You sure about this, Cap?" asked his engineer, a woman who had spent her whole life working in space. "Orders." "Our orders," Murphy replied. But privately, he marveled at the audacity of what they were being asked to do. The Council's fleet would never see them coming because no military mind would ever expect an attack from a civilian ice hauler. That was humanity's greatest advantage. While other species thought in terms of military versus civilian, soldier versus worker, human versus alien, humans saw only resources and opportunities. Every ship could be a weapon. Every colony could be a fortress. Every human could be a fighter when the need arose. The first 48 hours passed quietly. Council observers noted that human military communications had almost completely stopped. Ships were still moving, but they seemed to be heading away from populated areas. Several colonies had gone completely dark, their signals no longer detectable. Ambassador Zephyr felt confident as he prepared his final ultimatum. Humanity was clearly preparing to surrender, probably hoping to negotiate better terms for their civilians. It was what any rational species would do when faced with overwhelming force. What he did not know was that humanity had stopped being purely rational the moment they first looked up at the stars and decided they belonged there. The next 24 hours would teach the galaxy why Earth's children were the most dangerous species ever to leave their homeworld. The countdown had begun. The Council fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system exactly 72 hours after their ultimatum. Fleet Admiral Korath of the Vegan Collective stood on the bridge of the massive dreadnought Eternal Justice, watching his tactical display with satisfaction. 800 ships from 12 different species spread out in perfect formation, ready to enforce the galaxy's will on the upstart humans. "Sensor report," Korath commanded. "All human military installations appear abandoned, sir," his tactical officer replied. The young vegan's voice carried excitement. This was his first major operation, and he expected it to be over quickly. "Earth's orbital defense platforms are powered down. No ships detected in the inner system." Korath nodded approvingly. "The humans have seen reason. Signal the fleet to advance to Earth orbit. We will accept their surrender and begin the occupation." What Korath could not see was the small device hidden in an asteroid 3 light minutes away. The device had been watching and listening to every word spoken on his bridge, transmitting everything back to Earth at faster than light speeds. Humanity had learned to hide their technology in places no one would think to look on Earth. Admiral Torres watched the Council fleet advance through the solar system. Around him in the command center, dozens of officers tracked the movement of every enemy ship. The main screen showed 800 red dots moving steadily toward the blue dot that represented Earth. "They're coming in exactly as predicted," Dr. Kane observed. "Single file through the main shipping lane, following standard galactic approach protocols." "Of course they are," Torres replied. "They think they're conducting a police action, not a military operation." President Martinez joined them at the tactical display. "Are our people ready?" Everyone is in position, sir, Torres confirmed. Captain Vasquez reports the inner system assets are prepared. Commander Jackson confirms lunar defenses are online. The outer ring is ready to begin Phase 2 on your order. Martinez looked at the approaching fleet. Each ship represented thousands of lives from species that had never done anything to hurt humanity personally. But they were coming to cage his people, to force them into submission, to treat them like dangerous animals that needed to be controlled. Begin Phase 2, he said quietly. The first sign that something was wrong came when the Council fleet reached Jupiter's orbit. A routine sensor sweep detected something impossible, energy signatures coming from inside the gas giant's atmosphere. Sir, the tactical officer on Eternal Justice called out, his voice uncertain. I'm reading multiple contacts inside Jupiter. Itself? That should be impossible, Admiral Korath frowned. Clarify your report. The signatures appear to be ships, sir. Large ones, but nothing can survive inside a gas giant's atmosphere. Korath was about to dismiss the reading as sensor error when Jupiter erupted. 24 human ships burst from the swirling clouds of the gas giant like demons emerging from hell. They were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, ships designed specifically to hide in environments that would destroy normal vessels. Their hulls glowed white-hot from Jupiter's crushing atmosphere, but their weapons were already charging. Impossible, Korath whispered. The Jupiter fleet struck the Council's left flank before anyone could react. Human weapons, designed not for ship-to-ship combat but for ship-to-fleet combat, tore through formations that had seemed unbreakable moments before. The humans did not target individual ships. They targeted the spaces between ships, using exotic weapons that turned empty space itself into a killing field. All ships, evasive maneuvers, Korath shouted. But his fleet had been trained for orderly advances and retreats, not for fighting enemies that appeared from impossible places. The second wave came from Mars. What the Council had thought was an abandoned planet suddenly revealed massive rail guns hidden beneath its polar ice caps. Projectiles traveling at significant fractions of light speed crossed the solar system in minutes, striking ships that had no time to dodge. Admiral Korath watched in horror as a Zentoran battlecruiser simply ceased to exist, struck by a projectile, moving so fast that the explosion looked like a miniature star being born. Where are they? He demanded. Where are the human ships? The answer came from everywhere at once. Ships emerged from the asteroid belt, their hulls camouflaged to look like floating rocks. Others rose from behind Mercury, where they had been hiding in the shadow of solar collectors that the Council had assumed were civilian power stations. More appeared from the outer system, having traveled through hyperspace routes that galactic science declared impossible, but the most shocking emergence came from Earth's moon. Commander Jackson had spent 3 days preparing for this moment. As the Council fleet approached Earth, he activated systems that had been hidden beneath Luna's surface for 20 years. The moon's entire visible face split open like a flower, revealing weapon platforms that dwarfed anything in the Council fleet. This is Luna base to all human forces, Jackson announced on the tactical network. The ball is now open. What followed was not a battle in any sense that the galaxy understood. It was a demonstration of what happened when a predator species decided to stop hiding its claws. Human ships did not fight like civilized beings. They struck from ambush, disappeared when pursued, and reappeared where they were least expected. They used the solar system itself as a weapon, herding Council ships into gravity wells and solar radiation fields that tore apart even the most heavily armored vessels. Captain Elena Vasquez commanded the stealth cruiser Shadow Runner as it materialized behind the Altarian destroyer. Her ship's weapons were not the most powerful in human space, but they were precise. A single shot disabled the destroyer's engines, leaving it drifting helplessly. "This is Captain Vasquez to Altarian vessel Bright Honor," she transmitted. "Your ship is disabled, but your crew is alive. Surrender now, and you will be treated according to galactic law." The Altarian captain's response came back filled with static and shock. How did you get behind us?" "We've been here the whole time," Elena replied. You just weren't looking in the right place. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human ships appeared where they should not exist, struck with devastating precision, then offered quarter to survivors. It was warfare with a purpose beyond destruction. It was a message, Admiral. Korath realized his fleet was being systematically dismantled by an enemy he could barely see. Signal general retreat, he ordered. All ships withdraw to hyperspace. Immediately, but even retreat was not simple. The humans had somehow anticipated every escape route, placing ships and mines along hyperspace lanes that should have been secret. Council vessels found themselves trapped in a solar system that had become a giant hunting ground. The battle lasted 18 hours, but the real fighting was over in 3. The remaining time was spent on rescue operations as human ships pulled survivors from disabled Council vessels. It was a gesture that confused many in the Council fleet. Why save the lives of enemies you had just defeated? Dr. Kane explained it to President Martinez as they watched the casualty reports. "We're not trying to exterminate them," she said. "We're trying to educate them." The education was thorough. Of 800 ships that had entered the Sol system, fewer than 200 escaped. But more importantly, every moment of the battle had been recorded and transmitted across the galaxy by human communication networks that the Council had never known existed. Within hours, beings on thousands of worlds were watching footage of human ships emerging from gas giants, of weapons that turned space itself deadly, of a species that fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. The message was clear: humanity would not be caged. On the bridge of eternal justice, Admiral Korath stared at the tactical display showing his shattered fleet. Around him, his bridge crew worked frantically to coordinate the retreat of their surviving ships. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth." "Put it through," Korath said wearily. Ambassador Sarah Chion appeared on the main screen, standing in what looked like Earth's diplomatic center. Behind her, through large windows, the lights of major cities twinkled peacefully in the night. "Admiral Korath," she said politely, "I hope you will convey a message to the Council for me." Korath nodded, too exhausted to speak. "Please tell them that humanity appreciates their concern for galactic stability," Chun continued, "but we must respectfully decline their offer of protection. We are quite capable of taking care of ourselves." The transmission ended, leaving Korath staring at a blank screen. Around him, the wreckage of the most powerful fleet ever assembled drifted in the cold vacuum of space, a testament to what happened when someone tried to cage a predator. The Council's invasion of Earth was over. Humanity's real war was just beginning. The news of Earth's victory spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within days, every civilized world had seen the footage of human ships emerging from impossible hiding places and destroying the Council's greatest fleet, but more than just the battle itself. They saw something that changed everything. The humans had won without committing genocide. On the Council homeworld of Altair Prime, emergency sessions ran day and night. Ambassador Zephyr stood before the inner council, his blue skin pale with exhaustion. Around him, the most powerful beings in the galaxy argued and shouted at each other in languages that had not known true fear for centuries. "How could this happen?" demanded Chancellor Vex of the Centauri Federation. Her tentacles writhed with anxiety as she spoke. 800 ships, 12 species. How could primitives destroy our greatest fleet? "They are not primitives," Zephyr replied quietly. "That was our first mistake." High Counselor Thane of the Draconian Empire slammed his scaled fist on the council table. "Mistake or not, they must be punished. We cannot allow one species to defy the galactic order." But other voices were already questioning that order. Counselor Myra of the Epsilon Collective, whose species had joined the Council only 300 years ago, stood to speak. "Perhaps we should ask ourselves why they defied us," she said carefully. "The humans have not attacked any innocent worlds. They have not enslaved other species. They have only refused to submit to our authority. They occupied systems that were not theirs," Thane roared. Systems where the vegan collective was using slave labor, Myra replied. Systems where pirates operated with council protection. Perhaps the humans saw injustices we chose to ignore. The argument might have continued for hours, but it was interrupted by urgent news from across the galaxy. The human victory had done more than defeat one fleet. It had inspired every species that had ever chafed under council rule. On Kepler 442, the Tausetian mining colonies declared independence from vegan oversight. The workers who had been treated as slaves for generations suddenly found courage in humanity's example. When vegan security forces tried to restore order, they discovered that someone had been teaching the miners how to fight. Captain Elena Vasquez had arrived at Kepler 442 just 2 days after the battle for Earth. Her ship, the Shadow Runner, carried not weapons but something more dangerous, information. "We're not here to conquer you," she told the Tausetian leaders. "We're here to show you that the Council's protection is really just control." Within hours, Vasquez's crew was broadcasting across the colony networks. They revealed financial records showing how much wealth the vegans extracted from Tausetian labor. They exposed medical experiments conducted on miners without consent. Most damaging of all, they played recordings of vegan officials discussing the Tausetians as if they were livestock. The uprising that followed was swift and total. Vegan security forces found themselves facing miners who fought with desperate courage and surprising skill. When vegan reinforcements arrived, they discovered that the Shadow Runner had somehow vanished, leaving behind only the smoldering remains of their authority. Similar revolts erupted across the galaxy. On Proxima Station, the Rigelian trade workers, who had been locked into generations of debt, suddenly learned that their contracts were illegal under galactic law that the Council had never bothered to enforce. On the frontier worlds of the Outer Rim, human advisors appeared as if from nowhere, bringing technology and tactics that made former victims into formidable opponents. The Council tried to respond with force, but they faced a problem they had never encountered before. Their fleets were designed to fight other fleets in formal battles. They had no experience with the kind of warfare that humans taught their new allies. Admiral Korath, still recovering from his defeat at Earth, found himself facing this new reality at the siege of Epsilon Station. The mining platform had declared independence, and the Council had sent 50 ships to restore order. It should have been a simple operation. Instead, Korath found himself fighting ghosts. The station's defenses should have been easily overwhelmed, but somehow they had been transformed into something deadly. Weapons that should not exist fired from positions that should not be possible. When his ships moved to attack, they found themselves facing coordinated resistance from sources they could not detect. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we're reading human energy signatures, but our sensors can't pinpoint their locations." "They're here," Korath said grimly. "Somehow they're here." The humans were indeed there, but not in the way the Council expected. Small teams of specialists had infiltrated dozens of rebellious systems, bringing not armies but knowledge. They taught former slaves how to turn mining equipment into weapons. They showed oppressed workers how to use their own infrastructure against their oppressors. Most importantly, they revealed secrets that the Council had kept hidden for centuries. Dr. Elizabeth Kane coordinated the information war from Earth. Her intelligence teams had spent 30 years collecting evidence of Council corruption, and now they released it all at once. Financial records, secret communications, medical experiments, and systematic oppression were broadcast across every communication network in the galaxy. "The truth is our greatest weapon," she explained to President Martinez. "For 3,000 years, the Council has maintained power by controlling information. We're changing that." The revelations were devastating. Species that had trusted the Council for millennia learned that their world's resources were being systematically drained. Populations that had accepted limited freedoms discovered that other species enjoyed privileges they had been denied. Most shocking of all, they learned that the Council's peaceful rhetoric hid a system of exploitation that made the old galactic empires look benevolent. On Draconia Prime, Riots erupted when citizens learned that their government had been selling young draconians into military service for other species. The proud warrior culture that had built the draconian empire was horrified to discover that their leaders had become slave traders. Chancellor Vex of the Centauri Federation faced a no-confidence vote when her own people learned that she had been suppressing medical advances that could have saved millions of lives. The technology existed, but releasing it would have reduced profits for council-connected corporations. Even loyal council worlds began to question their allegiance. The revelation that the council maintained secret police forces to monitor all member species shocked populations that had believed they lived in a free society, but the most damaging revelation concerned the council's response to emerging species. For thousands of years, they had claimed to guide young civilizations toward peaceful development. The truth was far darker. Species that developed too quickly or asked too many questions were systematically sabotaged. Their leaders were assassinated, their colonies suffered accidents, and their technological development was secretly hindered. Humanity's rapid rise had not been despite council interference, but because they had somehow avoided it. Ambassador Sarah Chun revealed this truth in a galaxy-wide broadcast that reached every inhabited world simultaneously. Standing in the United Nations building on Earth, she spoke directly to trillions of beings who had never imagined such corruption was possible. The Council told you they invaded Earth to protect galactic peace, she said simply. But the records we have gathered tell a different story. They attacked us because we refused to be limited, because we asked questions they did not want answered, because we grew too fast for their control. The broadcast included evidence that the Council had orchestrated conflicts between species to prevent any of them from becoming strong enough to challenge Council authority. Wars that had killed billions had been started deliberately to maintain the balance of power that kept the Council in control. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the Council's authority. Species that had been enemies for centuries learned that their conflicts had been manufactured. Governments that had trusted Council guidance discovered they had been manipulated. Military forces that had sworn loyalty to galactic law realized they had been enforcing systematic oppression. Within weeks, 12 species had formally withdrawn from the Council. Another 20 had suspended their cooperation pending investigation of the charges. The Zephyrian Confederacy, longtime enemies of the Council, immediately offered alliance to Earth and any other world seeking independence. The galaxy's power structure, stable for 3 millennia, was collapsing in real time on Altair Prime. The Inner Council faced the greatest crisis in their history. Half their member species were in open revolt. Their fleets were spread across the galaxy trying to contain uprisings. Their authority was crumbling as more evidence of corruption emerged daily. We must negotiate, Counselor Myra insisted. The old order is finished. We can either help build something better or be swept away entirely. But High Counselor Thane refused to accept defeat. We still have loyal fleets, he declared. We still have worlds that depend on us. If the humans want war, we will give them war. What Thane did not understand was that humanity had already won the only war that mattered. They had not conquered the galaxy through force of arms. They had liberated it through force of truth. 6 months after the Council's failed invasion of Earth, the galaxy was unrecognizable. What had once been a stable, if oppressive, civilization now resembled a vast battlefield where ideas fought as fiercely as starships. On hundreds of worlds, former Council subjects were discovering what freedom truly meant. Admiral Torres stood in the command center of the newly constructed Harmony Station, humanity's first attempt at building something that could unite the galaxy's free peoples. Through the observation deck, he could see ships from dozens of species docked at the station's many arms. Tau Cetian miners worked alongside Draconian warriors, while Rigelian traders shared cargo bays with former vegan slaves. Status report. On the Liberation Fleet, Torres requested from his aide, Commander Sarah Park, recently promoted after her role in freeing the Proxima colonies, consulted her datapad. 67 species have formally joined the Free Worlds Alliance. Another 30 are providing material support. The Council's territory has shrunk to less than 40% of what it controlled 6 months ago. It had not been an easy transformation. The collapse of Council authority had created chaos across the galaxy. Trade routes that had operated for centuries were disrupted. Governments that had ruled for millennia found themselves facing angry populations demanding answers. In some systems, the transition to freedom had been peaceful. In others, civil wars raged as old grudges surfaced, but humanity had not simply destroyed the old order and walked away. Dr. Elizabeth Kane had spent the past months traveling from world to world, helping newly free societies figure out how to govern themselves. Her teams carried no weapons except knowledge, but they were changing the galaxy more effectively than any army. On Kepler 442, she stood before a gathering of Tau Cetian clan leaders who were struggling to organize their first free government in 500 years. "How did your species handle this transition?" asked Elder Crix, his scarred hands showing the decades he had spent working in the mines. "How did humans learn to govern themselves?" Dr. Kane smiled. "Badly at first. We fought wars, made terrible mistakes, and learned from our failures. The important thing is that we kept trying." She showed them records of Earth's history, not hiding the dark chapters but explaining how humanity had gradually built systems that protected individual rights while maintaining social order. The Tau Cetians listened with fascination as she described concepts like elections, constitutional limits on government power, and independent courts. "But what if we choose poorly?" asked another elder. "What if freedom leads to chaos?" "Then you fix your mistakes and choose again," Dr. Kane replied. "That's what freedom means. The right to be wrong, learn from it, and do better next time." Similar conversations were happening across the galaxy. Captain Elena Vasquez found herself serving as an unlikely diplomat on Rigel 7, where 3 different factions were competing to lead the planet's new government. Each group claimed to represent the true will of the people, and tensions were rising toward violence. "Why should we trust any of you?" Elena asked during a joint meeting of the faction leaders. "You're all asking people to give you power. Instead, why don't you ask what power the people want to keep for themselves?" The question puzzled the Rigelian leaders, who had grown up in a system where someone always ruled and everyone else obeyed. The idea that ordinary citizens could retain meaningful power was revolutionary. Elena helped them organize town halls where regular Rigelians could speak directly about what they wanted from their government. The results surprised everyone, including Elena herself. The people wanted safety from crime, fair courts to settle disputes, schools for their children, and the freedom to trade with whoever offered the best deals. They did not want grand military adventures or complicated ideologies. Government should serve the people, Elena explained to the faction leaders. Not the other way around. But not every world embraced the new order peacefully. High Counselor Thane of the Draconian Empire had refused to accept the Council's collapse. From his fortress world of Draconia Prime, he commanded the loyalty of 12 species that still believed in the old ways. These die-hard Council supporters had formed what they called the Restoration Alliance, dedicated to rebuilding galactic civilization under proper authority. President Martinez received regular intelligence reports about Thane's activities from human agents throughout the galaxy. The Draconian leader was building a massive fleet, recruiting soldiers from species that feared the chaos of freedom, and preparing for what he called the final campaign to restore order. "He has 600 ships," Admiral Torres reported during a war council on Earth. "Not as large as the force that attacked us, but better organized and more motivated. They believe they're fighting to save civilization itself, are they?" Martinez asked quietly. The question hung in the air for a long moment. The galaxy was indeed more chaotic than it had been under Council rule. Trade was disrupted, governments were unstable, and small conflicts erupted regularly as old grievances surfaced. Some species were thriving in the new environment, but others were struggling. Dr. Kane answered carefully. "Growing pains," she said. "Every free society goes through this period. The question is whether we help them through it or try to force them back into cages." The decision came when Thane's restoration fleet launched simultaneous attacks on 5 newly independent worlds. The assault was swift and brutal, designed to demonstrate what happened to species that abandoned proper authority. On Tau Ceti, Draconian shock troops landed in the mining colonies and began systematically arresting the leaders of the independence movement, the Free Worlds. Alliance faced its first real test. Would the liberated species stand together, or would they abandon each other when faced with serious opposition? The answer came from an unexpected source. Elder Crix of the Tau Cetians sent a message that was broadcast across the galaxy. We ask for help not as subjects begging their masters, but as free people calling to other free people. Stand with us not because you must, but because you choose to. The response was overwhelming. Within days, ships from 40 different species were converging on Tau Ceti, but this was not the old way of warfare, where one fleet met another in formal battle. The Free Worlds Alliance had learned from humanity's example. Captain Elena Vasquez commanded the relief force, but her fleet included Rigelian fast attack ships, Epsilon mining vessels converted to carriers, and even former vegan patrol boats crewed by liberated slaves. They did not fight like a traditional fleet. They fought like humanity had taught them, using every advantage, striking from unexpected directions, and turning the enemy's assumptions against them. The Battle of Tau Ceti lasted 3 days and became the stuff of legend. Draconian forces, expecting to face desperate colonists with mining equipment, instead found themselves fighting a coordinated resistance, supported by some of the most innovative tactics the galaxy had ever seen. Rigelian ships, small and fast, darted through the draconian formations like angry insects, targeting sensors and communications equipment. The converted mining vessels used their industrial equipment to create debris fields that disrupted draconian movements. Former vegan patrol boats, knowing their old master's technology intimately, jammed draconian communications and turned their own weapons against them, but the most effective tactic was psychological. Every draconian prisoner was treated with respect, given medical care, and allowed to communicate with their families. Many learned for the first time about the corruption that had driven their leaders to war. Some chose to switch sides rather than continue fighting for a cause they no longer believed in. High Counselor Thane watched his carefully planned campaign crumble from his flagship high above Tau Ceti. His forces were not just being defeated, they were being converted. The humans and their allies were not trying to destroy the Draconian Empire. They were trying to liberate it. Sir, his communications officer reported, we're receiving surrender requests from 6 of our squadron commanders. They say they want to negotiate independently. Thane realized that the old galaxy was truly dead. His empire, built on absolute loyalty and unquestioned authority, could not survive in a universe where every individual could choose their own path. The final battle of the Liberation Wars took place not in space but in the chambers of the new Galactic Assembly on Harmony Station. Ambassador Sarah Chun, now representing humanity in the galaxy's first truly democratic government, stood before delegates from over 100 species. We gather not as conquerors and conquered, she said, but as equals seeking common ground. The old council ruled through fear and control. We propose to govern through cooperation and consent. The assembly that emerged was chaotic, argumentative, and frustratingly slow to make decisions. It was also the first galactic government in history, where every species had an equal voice and every individual's rights were protected by law rather than the whims of their leaders. Not every species joined immediately. Some preferred independence to any form of galactic government. Others needed time to stabilize their own societies before committing to larger alliances. But the foundation was laid for something unprecedented, a civilization based on freedom rather than force.